Ladies and gentlemen, our program will now begin. Please welcome the CEO of the Churchill Club, Karen Tucker.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, to the Churchill Club. Our program tonight is called Blockchain Beyond Fintech. So I hope you all caught that, Beyond Fintech. When will hype meet reality? We're very excited to share with you the evening ahead, but first some brief comments and thanks are in order. Starting with a few words about Churchill Club. Since 1985, we serve as one of the premier independent nonprofit stages for conversations about technology and business innovation. And our passion is to inspire and fortify people like you in this room who intend to be better leaders, collaborators, citizens, innovators, etc. So we hope that the conversation tonight will help you with new insights and new connections. We always look for what's new, next, not widely known. We want to build on the information that's out there instead of repeating it. So if some of you perhaps feel like you're less initiated on the blockchain topic, you may have to go off and do a little bit of reading afterward. But we're trying to surface new insights and inspiration that can result in those new opportunities that all of us want. We certainly thank Accenture, Intel, and Shell for their support of this program. And we also thank the Linux Foundation, especially Brian Behlendorf, for invaluable assistance in framing the topic. We could not have done it without you. Thank you. And I would like to now welcome our distinguished speakers to the stage. We have Salim Ali of Loyakk, Matt Roszak of Bloq and Tally Capital, Rick Echevarria of Intel, and David Treat of Accenture, and our distinguished moderator, of course, Brian Behlendorf. Regrettably, Catherine Nicholson of Bloq Cipher had a family emergency, and she is unable to join us tonight. She sent her regrets. Thank you.
Wherever you'd like, I'll take the end here.
I think it went alphabetical, no?
Great. Yeah, take whichever seat feels right. Anywhere.
I think I'm on the end.
We were going to make Matt take the last one if he didn't show up right at the beginning. So, no. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for taking a chunk out of your weekend evenings to come and listen to us talk more about blockchains. I'm sure, this is the third event today that I've been at. I hate calling peaks of bubbles, for sure. I'm certainly not calling a peak here. But there's a lot of interest out there, and it's gone well beyond the application of the cryptocurrencies, and we're probably hearing lots about ICOs out there, that sort of thing. What I felt was important was, and what I think we felt was important was to tell you a bit about some of the other use cases going on out there, the ways that the technology base is starting to reinvent the delivery of other types of products and services, but also some of the philosophy and some of the thinking behind it, some of the limitations and challenges that we as an industry are facing today and could face as these roll out into production. And so we wanted to really pull together a diverse set of voices to tell you about, from a bunch of different perspectives, where that technology is now, where the industry is moving to, and perhaps even some novel stories you might not have heard yet about how it's being used. And so we're going to assume not a tremendous amount of sophistication of the understanding of what blockchain and technologies are, but nor are we going to lead a kind of a 101 tutorial. Instead, I think most of us have come to understand that blockchains are a distributed ledger of sorts, ones that create a system of record between participants in an ecosystem. And that can be as large as the whole wide internet, like the cryptocurrencies aim at. It could be as small as a group of 5 banks who want a settlement network between them. But the technology still has a lot of similar characteristics between these two different kind of points in the spectrum. And once we have that as a shared registry, as a shared ledger, the deployment of this thing called smart contracts on top allows us to automate a lot of business processes, right? But what can we do with this? Couldn't we just solve this with a big central database? We as technologists in the industry have gotten really good about building big central databases. So that's kind of the key question for tonight is, what is this good for? Where are we with it? And what are some things that we can do with it? So why don't I go down the row here? Why don't we go down? And for each of you, if you could tell us more about who you are, who your company is, how you make money from blockchain technology. That seems like a novel question for many of us. And yeah, just for about a minute each.
Thank you. My name is Salim Ali. So I'm the CEO of Loyakk. We are a young startup. On the notion of make money, blockchain, Bitcoin, money. So I think the theme is very consistent there, right? So we are building a platform powered by blockchain to help enterprises engage with their business network in the context of sales and deals. When SAP runs a deal, you bring in Accenture, you bring in Deloitte, you bring in a channel partner. All of that happens today in very old-fashioned approaches. What we're saying is let's secure that very nomadic value webs across in the sales context. And that's what we are calling an enterprise relationship platform. So that's what we're building. We've been around for close to 2 years, and the technology is tough to make it enterprise grade, make it private blockchain. We filed a few patents. So we are on this journey now to really transform this engagement for enterprises. And that's where we're hoping we'll make money as well.
Great. Matt?
Hi, Matt Roszak, co-founder and chairman of Bloq. We're an enterprise software company. And there's two parts of Bloq. There's Bloq Enterprise and Bloq Labs. On Bloq Enterprise, it's much like if we were sitting in the room 25 years ago and we said, hey, the internet's going to be a big deal. Let's build a software stack, a software suite that's going to enable a lot of this, people getting online. And much like we're seeing today, where people are building, connecting, and developing in this blockchain ecosystem, we said, what's that product stack that people are going to need that they're going to trip over every time? The internet, we'd say stuff like e-commerce, content management, et cetera. Here, that suite looks like a node, which is your connective tissue to different networks, a wallet, so you manage these assets, smart contract platform, a API connection to existing business systems. And so that's Bloq Enterprise. And we've partnered with some of the biggest companies in the world to help them develop blockchain ecosystems within their companies. How we make money there, it's a great question. It's not been asked on any panel, actually, that I've been on to date, which is like what's the point here? It's going to change the world. It is. So it's interesting, because like last year, we were on stage here, and Jim Zemlin asked, how do you describe blockchain in a tweet? 140 characters. I guess it's 280 now. But I said it's a journey. Blockchain's a journey. It's not like a tech. It's like saying cloud or internet. You don't buy cloud. You don't buy internet. You don't buy blockchain. You need applications and this kind of utility. And we're kind of figuring that out. That journey continues. There's a lot more people in the journey. Accenture's lining up lots of people, lots of brain power behind this. There's a lot more people in the room developing this. But it's a journey. That journey, from a financial standpoint, is more consulting-driven these days, more than any software company would ever want. But you always kind of convince yourself, good software companies started with as services businesses, and you kind of evolve, because a lot of companies, even some of the biggest ones in the world, are still developing a blockchain compass. And what's their direction? And you've got the same issues with any tech, whether it's SAP or Salesforce. It's like people, process, and systems. Those all take time, and take time to educate internally, and then figure out what that staircase is. So that's evolving. And then on Bloq Labs, we also we partner with the biggest companies in the world on blockchain infrastructure. We also develop new decentralized networks. So we partner with some of the leading companies out in the ecosystem, so like Quantum or Civic and several others. And we also launch our own decentralized networks. Yesterday, we announced Metronome, which is a cross-chain digital asset. So we're excited about that.
Good afternoon, and thanks for your time. My name is Rick Echevarria with Intel. I think everybody knows how Intel makes money. But I want to explain our role here. One of the important drivers of our business is understanding workloads, especially those workloads in the future. And close to 4 years ago, we started looking at cryptocurrencies, and we were trying to understand how that type of workload would inform our silicon roadmap. By the way, I forgot to say what I'm responsible for. I am responsible for all the security technologies that we built into the silicon across all of the business units at Intel. PCs, data centers, IoTG, automotive, FPGAs, et cetera. Okay, so a pretty broad view of cybersecurity in the silicon in the company. But coming back to crypto, we started looking at that 4 years ago, and we didn't think that such a smart decision. We didn't think that the economics there would justify us doing specific silicon design for crypto at the time, but we started looking at the underlying technology, just like the story of many companies, and maybe many of you here, started looking at blockchain and what that technology could do. And we joined a few of the standard bodies, including Hyperledger. We decided that in order to really understand this, we should probably build our own distributed ledger technology, which we have. And that started informing us on what type of technologies we could build into the hardware to do three things. Because we could focus on a lot of different problems to solve, but we said there's three things that we believe we could probably solve with some technologies. The first one is, believe it or not, privacy. And how could you protect transactions and bring privacy into blockchains through the use of some of the technologies that we're developing. The second one was security itself. And we're going to hear a lot about smart contracts over the coming, tonight probably, and then over the coming months. How can we provide some assurances that those smart contracts really can be trusted? And then, of course, scalability. And scalability is an interesting area because there's a lot of decisions that many of you are going to make around the processes that you're trying to optimize, the number of partners that you're going to have. That will lead you into the number of nodes that you're going to deploy. And it's going to lead you into a number of decisions around how are you going to accept, authorize, certify transactions on a node. And that's going to lead you to, or lead some of your partners to help you make decisions around how do you make those types of decisions. And there's this concept of consensus on blockchain that we've been spending a lot of time on, because we don't want all of you to have to go build a power plant like some of the cryptocurrencies have to do today, right, to be able to attest and accept transactions. So what are the efficient ways in which you can, with security in mind, accept transactions, and then try to do that in as energy efficient as possible, so that then you can invest your money in business process innovation and not in having to justify this very expensive compute infrastructure that may not be giving you the right return for the investment you're making.
David?
My name is Dave Treat. I lead Accenture's blockchain business, which for me is I just couldn't ask for a more fun job, because I basically run a startup within a 430,000 person organization. So I've got this massive infrastructure, and one of the things that we've done over the past 4 or 5 years is surveilled for kind of the latest new technologies that we were constantly looking at new technologies, deciding we've got a labs infrastructure where it's pure R&D. No, they're not meant to make money. It's not client facing. As soon as that R&D turns into something that's interesting to our clients, we then tap some poor schmuck to build a business within our infrastructure. And I got lucky enough to do it for blockchain. And so it's been incredible. And one of the things that we realized early on, or I suppose if you don't know us, we're not a product company. So I'm fiercely defending in our space that we are technology independent. We're the world's largest independent technology service provider. And so it's very important to us that I spend most of my time building relationships with the platforms and the technology providers, because our objective in all cases is to drive business transformation for our clients, stitching together whatever combination of technologies will make sense in that moment. But so within that construct, we've been building up our team. One of the things you asked us to talk about, kind of something interesting and fun. I've spent more than 20 years in financial services, so I have some aspects of my soul that need repairing. And one of the most interesting things of blockchain is that underpinning every use case that we touched was identity. It just the whole nature of breaking a messaging-based business model where we have to send data back and forth and getting into a shared data construct is, in a corporate and enterprise construct, you have to know who you're sharing it with and what rights do they have to share and on what basis, et cetera. And so we started going down that path, and then we're fortunate enough to come across paths with a woman who is starting up an organization called ID 2020. It's a UN-affiliated organization with the very, again, kind of healing my soul, very fantastic challenge to address of the 1.1 billion people in this world who have no access to identity, right? No recognized identity. They're excluded from modern society in every construct, financial, educational, legal, voting, government, you name it. they're on the fringes of our world society and the most off, the most worst off. And so being able to bring digital identity to them became our mission, right? So we've joined up and focused on it, and have done some really fun things around, I guess, Brian, to your point of why not build up the world's largest database, right? So we picked up the refugee use case as the first one, which by definition, a refugee has had a spectacular falling out with their country, just as the basic construct of a refugee. So if their identity is housed by a single authority, like all of ours is today, right? The US government, I've applied for my passport, my state has my driver's license, and there are authorities that control my identity, that if I have that spectacular falling out with that authority and I become a refugee, I'm now in a really bad place. And so what we did was create a construct to say, look, we need to be able to put an identifier in a place that's unreachable by any one authority. Be reachable by multiple authorities or just the individual themselves. And the notion of a public permissionless blockchain construct as a housing point for an identifier, not of personal data, we're not aggregating data, we're not putting people's personal data on a blockchain, but using it as an identifier to index identity data at source, linking it all together, and then providing a basis by which the individual can carry around with them attestations from the authorities that they interact with. We don't mess with the relationship that they have with an authority today. We keep the data where it is. But now suddenly, my identity data today that's fragmented between the U.S. government's view of me, the state of Connecticut's view of me, Amazon's view of me, my librarian, bookie, mom, you name it, right? Like all of those aspects now could suddenly be linked together and provide a basis by which I can carry around a personal data store of attestations to show up to the next authority and have control over what I show them. And so we're having the most fun with that. I'll stop.
Yeah, no. David jumped to my second question, which was a novel use case to try to illustrate kind of where this technology allows us to do things that were either impossible to do before, hard to do, or that inadvertently created kind of central market actors. The Uberization of any given industry, right? And so it was going to be my question kind of down the row. I do want to return to identity later because I think that's so fundamental and implicit in a lot of these. But at the high level, the use case for it is you don't want a central actor necessarily, and whether it's refugee camps or you can't afford one, having one that can actually, having a service where the individual actors in that ecosystem, the healthcare clinics and other service providers in a refugee camp can attribute that identity with other interesting, can understand. So if somebody shows up at a clinic, gets an immunization shot, and then shows up at another clinic, you know that they've had that first shot. Now they're due for their booster, and now that they've had their booster, now they're immunized as per standard or something like that, right? So this is a way of doing that without needing a central coordinating hub at the center of that, right? Mm-hmm. What are some other use cases that people have seen that similarly are novel applications of this that are beyond fintech, right? But might still have a financial component to them. But really also, can you dive into why a blockchain is useful and interesting in that context?
So I'll start. So when I look at the broader blockchain industry, right, I look at it as a 2x2. On one dimension is centralized or not today in the physical world. The second dimension is what is the asset that needs to move across, currency, information, whatever. And if you say there are industries today, use cases today where it's already centralized, there's a toll taker, a central operator, you can easily disrupt that because what value they're providing, the value is not that high. That's a classic, low-hanging fruit. The challenge there, of course, is that incumbency, a lot of issues that come with taking an incumbent out. Bank, classic example, right? Money transfer, classic example. What we said is there are use cases where decentralization is very, very valuable in the physical world, but it doesn't happen because the tech does not exist today. What can you do there? The second thing we said is let's not focus only on the value dimension, the currency dimension. That is a dimension. Let's focus on the information dimension. So if you take information and you need centralization, that's the area we try to focus on, which is not typical for most, I think, of the projects today that's going on. That said, the refugee example is the one that's very compelling to me on the altruistic side.
The which example? Sorry.
The refugee example.
Refugees, yeah.
Yep. Meaning it's not bottom line driven necessarily in the short term, but the idea that you can give an identity to someone who's most in need of it is very compelling. The challenge, of course, is that how do you make the not last mile, the last 100 meters work? Because the person who has the need of an identity doesn't have the tools to really be able to control and manage the identity. So that's a big challenge there. So that example is what I really like. At the same time, there are some big challenges there as well, which is what I'm sure David and team are actually trying to solve. On our side, we applied this logic to enterprises in the context of sales and deals, which is what I mentioned before, which is Accenture has a deal. They want to bring in a channel partner, a vendor, a startup. Today it happens on email. Let's email these guys. Let's give them some information here, information there. What are we able to create a nomadic, blockchain-powered, very easy to create value web, only the right people have access, only they can see the right information. Then a lot of things can happen. So that's the way we looked at it, and that's my perspective on what we are trying to solve. And the other one is the example of what's really compelling in a real-world setting.
I think we've seen this march of enterprise, and I think a lot of financial services companies have raced to blockchain. Kind of being very self-aware. This kind of trustless middle center of what they do, arguably in the next decade or so, will be for free. It'll just be a service. The notion of Mark Andreessen's famous quote, "Software's eating the world," will come into focus on that dimension. And so that was kind of the first batch of enterprise that came into the blockchain room. And then it's now starting to swing to say, okay, these money factors are hard, complex, and almost daunting. Let's swing back and make sure, back to that people process things and get people in these organizations to swim and kind of get in the pool. Let's look at non-financial use cases. And so it's opening up these identity layers. Supply chain is a very big, complex thing. We're spending lots of time on supply chain and trying to figure out how do you move some of that data. It usually starts with data, and then asset transfer, and then automated processing, that smart contracts place. So that's kind of like the flight path of some of these projects. And so it's everything as, almost as pedestrian as let's give reward tokens to employees on a blockchain internally. And that's a start. Some people define that as a start before they start saying, let's put assets on a blockchain or do anything more provocative than that. And I think that's some of those form factors are important to build and think through to get kind of internal buy-in, and then start seeing around corners they don't really see today. And so much of this is a process. So much of this is an evolution. And every now and then you go on CoinDesk and read these great innovations. The distance to that is a lot, because it's like, in many ways, it's like saying the classic, we're talking about Uber, and 20 years ago we'd be kind of out of luck because all those layers, payment processing, GPS, iOS, all those things that made Uber were there, and so we're building a lot of those layers. David mentioned identity it's so critical in this space, and even to other adjacent spaces like Internet of Things. Without identity layers for people, companies, machines, so without identity, without payment, Internet of Things is just things. In many ways, you just don't have that much dynamics to do stuff, and so this is critical infrastructure.
To get more concrete, is there like a specific supply chain kind of story to tell, or is there
Actually, I have a couple, by the way. I have a couple. And by the way, I'm not an MIT grad, and I own no stock in the Wall Street Journal, but if you want to understand usages of blockchain on a daily basis, just get the daily MIT newsletter and then read the Wall Street Journal. Just case in point, this morning there was an article about Cargill and the work they're doing with turkeys, right? And it was interesting because yesterday I was having a conversation with somebody on the Walmart example, and I thought that was impressive. So the Walmart example is a farm to shelf, to the store shelf. And the importance is that, and many of you may be aware, that food safety is a really big issue around the world. And if you look at the time, for those of you who went to Chipotle on the wrong day, how long it took to understand the supply issue, where the bad vegetables coming from. It took weeks. So Walmart took one commodity, mangoes, and they implemented a pilot using blockchain, and a process where today it takes them about 6 days to understand where that mango, what the farm it came from. They got it down to 2 seconds. By the way, yesterday I said 2 minutes because I couldn't believe it was 2 seconds, and my technical assistant said, you got it wrong in the presentation, it was 2 seconds. And I said, okay, got it. Then this morning I hear that I was reading the turkey example. So this is a farm-to-table example. So they basically they did is they took 4 farms in Texas, right, and they did the traceability all the way from the farm to the table. And in the future, you may get a little tag in the turkey, applicable, we're getting close to Thanksgiving. You're going to be able to look at the tag and understand what farm that came from. So you think about the implications for users that say, I really like turkeys from this state of the nation, and I don't like turkeys from this one, and you'll have that opportunity. Yeah. But the food safety opportunity is even more impressive. The third example that I will cite, and the other two, by the way, I have no idea if we're working on that, one of those examples. I just think they're neat examples. But the other one that we're actually working on is around rights management for music. Okay, you have an artist. When you look at an artist that creates, some sort of art, but in this case, let's just talk about music. And this was a case study, by the way, in the Don Tapscott book on blockchain. You go look through the chain, and how much of the value they created they get back is very small. So can I create an IP that says, I am going to write a song, and I'm going to put a smart contract around this song, and that smart contract will determine who has access to my song, what's the pricing. They had a great example of this artist that said, if you're buying my song on your birthday, you're going to get the song for free. On Sunday, I'm going to decide that anybody over 65 years old is going to get a discount on this piece of art. I mean, these are the kinds of interesting use cases that people are looking at. And it's important to understand 2 things. There's the creativity of the human in defining these use cases, and then there's what the technology can make possible. We'll take care of the technology. Okay? We meaning the technology industry, right? A lot of our partners that I see here. It's really, what kind of business problem are you trying to solve? It's, that's where the big opportunities are going to come. Don't worry too much about the technology, because as I'm seeing all these, I'll give you one more and then I'll shut up, because I just thought about it. Last week, we did a demonstration with a company in the auto industry where we were looking at capturing data about driving patterns, put that on a blockchain, do the communication securely over a mobile network so that you can get into dynamic auto insurance rate offerings, right? So the whole point of this is there's some really interesting use cases. The technology part of it is coming together, right? We're working collectively here. It's really, do you want to take advantage of blockchain for business process efficiencies? Do you want to create new business models, or you want to do something very disruptive? And those are the opportunities you want to go evaluate.
David, terrific. You had this great idea about building on the food safety.
Building on the food safety one, yeah. I mean, so it's the other dynamic, right? That's going to be a lot of fun over the next couple of years. Is the easiest use case to define is just the cost savings of eliminating the messaging based model, right? Just the data reconciliation, our ops teams, like just the cost savings, but. That we'll do that. But the fun thing is then the creative things that emerge, right? To your point of these new products and services. So one of the ones we're doing a lot of work on supply chain, and we started to focus on responsible supply chain, right? And the notion of, and this to your exactly to your point, right? Is actually I woke up the other morning. There was a BBC presentation about sapphires in Madagascar, right? So you have people in Madagascar. Cutting down national forests, mining sapphires, they're getting, on average, $25 a stone. So there's a behavior that needs to be stopped around cutting down the national forest. They're getting $25 a stone. It's then the stone's making its way to a city. The person who does the initial cutting and cleaning is getting $250 on average per the stone. And then by the time it makes it to the jewelry store in San Francisco, it's on average $5,000 a stone. So you have a supply chain with a massive amount of value at the end, a behavior that you want to change at the beginning of let's not cut down the national forest, and the ability, historically we've had zero ability to get really any effective movement of the value at this end to stream down to really change the behaviors at source. There are a lot of companies whose mission is just squarely focused on this, and when we're joining in, and in the brainstorming, a new model came out, which basically we just submitted the patent for it, and we're calling it Tip the Farmer. So the notion is let's change the use case a little bit to growing food, right? Or the farm to table example. But you or I, any of us were standing in the Whole Foods aisle. We're looking at a cute picture of the farmer and his family, and there's a QR code on it, and we decide actually I value the fact that they're acting the way socially we want them to act, and we're not cutting down the wrong thing or et cetera. So I'm going to have the consumer have the ability to directly tip the farmer. Don't have it go all the way back through the supply chain. And the things that will enable it, to your point, right, these other adjacent capabilities, MasterCard's got a great approach right now around biometric on card. And the whole notion of identity and linking that the identity to the human through biometrics, giving the assurance that through a distributed ledger platform, I could send that $5 tip or whatever directly to the farmer. There's the auditability, the traceability, the speed at which it gets directly to that individual who we're trying to change the behavior on. So it changes the whole value dynamic because you're not touching the existing supply chain. You're creating an added, additional components to how value is going to be exchanged, and we can't wait to put it to test to see what happens.
I want to applaud that tip the farmer. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
Cool. Are there other novel use cases? Maybe a different way to ask this.
I'll throw one more.
Okay.
You got a couple. The pharmaceutical serialization. So, sorry, I should say that without slurring. Pharmaceutical serialization is a new global regulation basically to try to address the 1 million people plus that die every year because of counterfeit drugs that make its way into the pharmaceutical supply chain. So there's regulation that basically says to anyone involved in that ecosystem, they have to definitively be able to prove the state of tracing the drug from the point of manufacture to the point of consumption. And initially there was a lot of consternation about, or still there's a lot of consternation about it. So we're doing some work with DHL, and we've basically applied blockchain to this construct to say, look, it's perfect, right? In this construct of being able to track and trace from that initial point right to end consumption, having all of the actors, the various actors, from the manufacturer to the shipper to the port to the get all together into a single construct to be able to track and trace the movement of drugs. Again, kind of tying to a social good, not necessarily a financial outcome.
But why did that need to be a blockchain? I mean, in answering that, just to open it up to the rest of the panel, what are the criteria that are worth considering or variables at play in answering a question like that? Because any example we can give you, could be faster, cheaper, more economic, whatever, if it's done by a central provider, right? Somebody who is not evil, right, or beneficent in some way. But there's reasons why we don't all do that, right? So factoring that in, what are some of the reasons why a blockchain is appropriate for that case, or the music publishing case, or any of these others that we can bring up?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'll give a short one, and then you just pile on. I'll do one piece of it. So the gist of it, right, was we're trying to break down many of our issues come from the messaging that happens, right? That's where the data quality breaks down. It's the inefficiency of passing messages back and forth. The sheer confidence you get from sharing access to data is what's so promising. Now, you could share access to data if you had a trusted third party to which you were going to allow them to build that database to which everyone hooks up their systems. Now, the litmus test is, as you as a company willing to trust that third party by having your ops risk finance systems hooked directly to that data store? Because that's the only way you're going to eliminate the messaging and actually achieve the value we're trying to achieve, is if you're going to allow your finance system to point to something outside of your firewall who's run by someone else's database administrator, and I have yet to meet someone who's willing to do that. So, the first basic construct is, unless you've got that perfectly trusted party who you would trust their database administrator with your core system, then traditional data structures are not going to work.
Right.
I think if you go 5 years back, right, there was no data. Everything was big data. Meaning every problem you put forth was the moniker that was in fashion was used. So today, blockchain is a panacea for everything. I mean, that's how we're looking at it. In fact, it's not. We know that, right? And it's a part of the hype cycle. Now, when we looked at it, we said, if the notion of a central operator or toll taker is providing value, then there's reason for that. But in industries or use cases, there's no value other than skimming the cream of the top, then that's clearly a reason why these toll takers should not exist, should be disrupted. So that's one way to look at it. In that use case, where the central node has no role, centralized node has no role, then you can certainly say blockchain has value to provide. Then if you look at it beyond that and say, listen, what does blockchain really provide, right? Forget the nodes, forget the tech, forget the SHA-256, all of that. Forget all of that, right? Ultimately, it basically is identity. Who you say you are, you are. When I say who, meaning any node. That's number one. Number two, it totally secures the transport. This packet is going to get there with provenance, with security, all of that, right? So that's very, very, very powerful. And the third thing is you can control the span of the unit moving across. It gets to you, what do you do with it? So you apply these three modalities and say, in a decentralized model, if they pass this test to me, it's a good use case for blockchain. That's the way we looked at it, and that's the thing I think over time it'll evolve. And my biggest challenge also is any consumer, any blockchain solution that touches a customer, the end consumer, is a big leap. Because they should not care or be worried about blockchain. It's a piece of tech. We don't care. So blockchain to them is irrelevant. So to me, the biggest challenge is going to be the last 100 feet from the phone to me as a consumer that'll say yes or no for me to blockchain. Matt, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I guess the way I look at blockchains are networks, right? And when you have people, partners, suppliers, customers in a network, developing a blockchain-based network and having rules that everybody abides by, and then having data that's immutable so you can't change it. So one of our customers is in the airplane parts business. So FAA-approved airplane parts. David mentioned tracking and tracing. And some of these things from seed to sale, pharmaceuticals, FAA-approved airplane parts, these are really important SKUs, really important form factors that you need to track and trace. And when you have a disparate network of lots of people, you need to set up these rules so you can trust that network and trust the data.
So as an example of another industry that looks like it's pretty ripe for reinvention, well, in a number of different ways, healthcare. There's been quite a few companies kind of investigating the application of blockchain tech to healthcare. Is that appropriate? What are the first kinds of use cases we're likely to see, and what's really the long-term potential of that in that sector? I know some of you are operating in that space. So, Rick?
Yeah, there's for us, there's two in particular. The use of blockchain to accelerate the claims processing, which is somewhat analogous to what we talked about with the supply chain. But those processes today are taking, well, you all know, 90 days on average. We can shorten that significantly. That's one of the areas that we're focusing on. The second area in healthcare is whether and this goes back to your point, somewhat similar to the refugee example, but how do we get people control their personal records and the ability to share that in some way with all the privacy laws and regulations around, but that it enables the effective delivery of healthcare and attention. Those are the two places where we're focusing.
Yeah, in fact, you announced something with PocketDoc about a month ago
yes.
on Sawtooth.
On Sawtooth Lake, yes, we're implementing those two use cases with them and their consortium. And this is, by the way, a very important point. A number of these standard bodies, which one of them you're leading, are being very helpful in terms of making sure that you can apply the technology to different business problems. Yeah. And that's participation in standard bodies is something that we're very committed to, because we can apply similar concepts to supply chain and healthcare. Identity, I think, applies to everything, right?
And it would seem like in healthcare, I mean, the type of personal data we're talking about there is very personal, right? It's even the metadata about it is personal, right? Like the fact that one has had an HIV test, for example, is as titillating or whatever as perhaps whatever the results are of that, right? So how would we use a blockchain for something where it seems like almost the opposite, where it's like if a blockchain is about distributing amongst everybody in this room a perfect copy of a ledger, how do we use it for actually personally identifiable information, confidential information? What is its utility there?
Well, some of the you want to go ahead. You were going to say something. No, go for it. Go for it.
So Brian's tipping on like a key challenge, right? So there was initial excitement, right? That it got talked about frequently, like the naked unconscious in the emergency room. Like,
say it slowly again so people.
So you've got someone who's unable to identify themselves in any way, right? And if they're, sorry, I meant to say alone and then the other 3 words.
If they show up at a hospital, is what you're saying, and they don't have ID on them,
no ability to
they
identify
don't remember
themselves,
who they are,
even verbally.
you still need to know what their medical history is.
And
yes.
and it couldn't, often those are the most critical moments to direct care, right? So the ideal situation is in that moment you have some ability to be able to access their medical information, know that they're allergic to this, don't cut that, don't intubate them, do intubate them, et cetera. But you immediately trip into some of the challenges around the notion of, there's no CISO that's going to be comfortable with putting PII information into a consolidated, ubiquitously available, construct only protected by encryption. Like that is a long way off. I'll just make that statement. If ever, and so the notion of how do you do identity proofing? Does someone belong to a system? We started to do a lot of brainstorming of, well, how could you make that work, and the like. And so there's some basic premises that we've basically decided are key as we do the early work in this, which is one, again, don't put PII into a publicly encrypted construct. The second one is keep data at source as best as possible and be able to provide the linkages to that data and have it indexed together, but keep data at source. Right. Don't move it. And then I couldn't tell if you were smirking or not around the, in a construct of if health information in a blockchain construct gets into the wrong place, right? So my very personal piece of data gets into a blockchain-based construct of someone else. You have to have but from HIPAA law, social expectations, laws, regulations, you have to have an ability to fix it.
Sure.
And so that's another area of focus.
Yeah, I think an important point, and I'm glad you related that story, is privacy can get in the way of innovation in this space for the reasons you articulated. So that's why earlier I said there's 3 things that we're focused on from the beginning: privacy, security, scalability. You would think it's Intel, it should be performance first, but it really wasn't because of the issues around privacy. And I think that as you're going down your blockchain journey, the management of the data, including all aspects of it, including privacy and access, very important design point if you want to be successful in this space. And there's a lot of different technologies that you can apply. Just don't let, I wouldn't let, privacy is an important consideration. Don't let it get in the way. There's probably a number of different ways we can solve it. Design it in, but there's a number of different research efforts to try to address this privacy issue, because that's usually a stopper for a lot of people.
Right. And we'll go to questions in about 10 minutes. Before I do, though, anything else on the kind of the healthcare kind of use cases that either of you have seen?
Not really healthcare, but to build up on the same notion. Take credit card history, given Equifax. Same notion. Equifax owns my credit history. They're compromised. We're all compromised. In theory, that like a medical record, that should be yours. It should be mine. That's another area where it's ripe for disruption in the sense that it's my history. I can share with whom I want, and I take ownership of that as well. So just kind of build a parallel to what you said for the medical industry there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's a large part of the internet identity industry. I mean, people who have been working on standards like OAuth and OpenID and others for a long time who, have long been frustrated at saying the revolution turned into log in with Facebook, log in with Twitter, right? When there's been a belief that, where the internet came from was a much more decentralized view of identity and of personal data and that sort of thing. And I think there's a bit of convergence happening now between people somewhat in the cryptocurrency community. I'm thinking of like Uport and some of the other key management stuff being done, Civic, right, with some of the private ledger or permission ledger kind of efforts like the Sovereign Foundation and a project we have at Hyperledger called Hyperledger Indy, which is about trying to build these overlay networks so that you can tie and correlate your identity and information on one ledger with your identity and information on another, bring it back to you as like a wallet that you're managing assets in. And this is a way potentially the businesses being able to store less data about you. Because I think in the aftermath of Equifax and with the rise of the general data protection regulations in the European Union in May, companies are going to start to realize, we've long heard data is an asset, right? Some people have said data is the new oil. Oil is kind of interesting because what happens when you have too much oil? It's kind of toxic, right? It runs the risk of spilling, right? You have to buy insurance in case it does and clean it up afterward, right? And in some ways, data is kind of like that. You keep it around for too long and keep around too much of it. And if you do have to issue a warning about somebody's data being privacy being lost, that's kind of a black eye on a company. If we can provide an answer to that by using distributed ledger tech, that seems to fundamentally touch consumers in a big way, even if they don't have that direct access or direct contact with the blockchain themselves. So there's a lot of hope for that. We'll see projects coming out in that space soon, hopefully pilots and production at some point. But yeah, that's and it is at the heart of every interesting kind of project we have. What are some other interoperability challenges out there? I mean, in some ways, I keep telling people this is like 95 in the web, somewhat like 1999, insofar as, there's a lot more money than Clue, it seems, at times, and a bewildering array of different technologies for people diving into this space to try to understand. And I think even sometimes we as technologists don't do a great job of using the same vocabulary between our different projects, let alone looking for opportunities to collaborate. But what are some, is this a short-term problem, or in the long term, will it be an Apple versus IBM versus, or let's say PC versus Mac kind of thing? Will there be major whole different categories of technology that require retooling, or is this kind of noise like you have at the beginning of any technology movement?
If you look at history, right? Take Linux, take Unix, take MySQL. They were open source, but they do interoperate with existing other platform, database layer, at the OS layer. So it happens all the time. It's just a transition in time.
Don't fear diversity then.
That's right. Okay. It's just inevitable. And I think right now, when enterprises are consuming blockchain, that's the last topic on their mind because they don't have the basics right. So interoperability will come, but it's going to come in a continuum, and it will be solved. History has told us that it's always solved. There's no very rare examples where things don't operate together. Maybe not perfectly, but they do work together in general.
Okay.
Just as a stupidly clever quip, right? The diversity is a problem in one context. So one of the things that as we started to work with clients and get to like actual, we're trying to plug stuff into existing legacy infrastructure, or existing infrastructure, often legacy. The whole HSM integration is hardware security module. I'm looking for facial expressions of. All right, let me skip over the notion of where you store keys. There's a standard in financial services and government and pharmaceuticals and any high security industry. You do not put keys in an application layer. You store it in these physical devices. Think of it as a physical vault. Literally, if you kick it or bump into it, it shuts itself down. Right? These are physical vaults to support key management. They are really tricky to work with. And so one of the things that's freaked out a few of our clients is the diversity of I want to work with 3 or 4 different platforms, and I want to be able to test and work with many. If I have to do that integration 3 or 4 times to my HSM infrastructure, we're done. We've now just tripled our time frame, and it's a nightmare. So one of the things that we focused on is, well, how do we abstract that away? Like, can we create, can we all get together, create a library of those, basically a library that contains the interface layers, so that the corporates and enterprises that want to use, and experiment and engage can install something once, and then be able to work with multiple platforms. So there are those gotchas as you get into like true production environments that we're starting to trip into.
Yeah, we see an internet of change, so a lot of blockchains that have to interoperate. So seeing a multi-token, multi-network, blockchain world is ahead of us, and we're seeing that. On the enterprise side, there's Hyperledger that provides an amazing fabric to build and innovate, and then you have this public blockchain side of Bitcoin and Ethereum and everything else. And much like history is a great example, companies that were regulated or public didn't just jump on the internet. They built intranets, and then they kind of went found the font of innovation of open permissionless networks to be better and start incorporating that, or actually jumped on that next rail. And we're seeing the same evolution here. There's different form factors here at the same time, because we're not necessarily moving cat pictures on Instagram. These are money form factors, asset form factors. These are security form factors that are going to be a lot different. And so in getting there, the bar raises a lot higher. And I think some of the deeper thinking on identity and the partitioned identity, who sees what and when. I think these are very complex problems to solve. But the font of innovation, both on enterprise and on the public blockchain sector, is amazing right now. I mean, we're seeing the Cambrian explosion on the ICOs and all the innovation there, from identity to new rails to you name it. It's a fantastic moment in time to be a part of.
Enterprises who want the tyranny of choice for them to be narrowed down to one or two like leaders, is it too early to do that? Is it is right now when fast followers should join, or even like?
That's a great question. And just you have to. I mean, there's customers we have where they're going to go into production with 5 blockchain projects in the next 12 months, and a lot of them are well known, and they may repeat the sins of past, where they have legacy systems. They're maybe a bank or what have you, where they've got 30 acquisitions over 30 years in 30 countries, and now with these new blockchains, they're just going to re-silo certain data. And so thinking about interoperability and thinking about the future of kind of creating a platform where those blockchains could plug into, where they see data, where they see they could move assets, and then they could do that smart processing with smart contracts. Those are some of the constructs to say, how do I, in a instincts and principles way, kind of future-proof what's happening on the 100 other blockchains, public, private, or otherwise, that I could participate in. So.
And to that point, Brian, most projects today are not forklift upgrade projects. They are incremental test the water projects. Because enterprises are not ready. There are too many moving parts. Good concepts exist, no question about it. Going back to what David said, here's a data point. For every dollar SAP used to sell in software, service partner used to make $7. Because of integration, because of customization, and that model is going to continue perhaps more so for blockchain in a good way.
Absolutely.
So in the short term, right, there will be some churn in terms of unknowns, but the projects are more manageable. They're more contained, which is good for all of us. So they don't bite more than you chew, and then the whole industry here, right, gets abandoning.
And it is like, again, being in the early days of the web and trying to figure out what are the predominant server-side technologies going to be. And the truth is, they never really converged. They bifurcated, and there's generations, and no one's really doing active server pages anymore, thankfully. But it's a good thing we didn't standardize on them too early, right? David, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, so I misquoted Brian last week, and so I'm going to throw the question back and allow you to just
Okay.
So how should we feel, Brian? How should we feel about our, how are we going to feel about our V1s? When we get to V2s?
I've said, if you're not embarrassed by your V1, a few months after releasing it, 9 months, something like that, if you're not embarrassed by your version 1 of any software project, you waited too long to release it. Right, and I mean, this is because developers are naturally very hesitant to kind of put that label on it and telegraph the message to the public. Yes, you can run this in production, especially a stack that's about tracking digital assets, where if something goes wrong, I mean, we've seen on the public chain, right, simple off by one errors that have led to millions of dollars being lost during a fundraise, right? So so this is real assets at play. Fabric, one of the projects that Hyperledger has hit a 1.0 when those developers said, we're confident enough that this is ready to run in production. Sawtooth will be there before the end of the year. We might have some other projects there in that same time frame. But it's an important pivot point for any open source project, I think, to telegraph that level of confidence. Right?
But the point is huge, right? That we're at V1s, right? Like across the board, there are now 3, 4, pick your number, right? That everyone's at V1s. So the amount of innovation, that's going to be happening over the next couple of years, and
even when you go to do a refresh in 18 months, it's going to be a different set of technologies, or at least the one you chose will have evolved quite a bit. Yeah, this is a fast-moving landscape, for sure. But there are developers and others focused on it. So we launched something called the Quilt project at Hyperledger, which is an implementation of the interledger protocol. It's a set of APIs for invoking, actually being able to, if you wanted to buy a house with Bitcoin, it's a way where the house title is tracked on a separate ledger. It's a way to have both transactions succeed or both fail, right? You don't want to have changed the entry on the house ledger without the Bitcoin transaction having succeeded, or the opposite, right? So there are novel technologies coming out that I think, to Salim's point, where there's customer demand for it, we will see that interop emerge. We will see standards emerge. And it may be that certain technology domains like scripts behind websites, don't end up having a need for that to converge, because as technologists, we prefer the flexibility and the agile kind of nature of that. So I guess we'll find that out over time. Why don't we go to questions now from the audience? Okay, great. And be sure and kind of look for the folks carrying the microphones around if you want to ask the next question. So, please tell us who you are and where you're from.
My name is Salim Ali. I represent a company called Moderator in San Jose.
Okay.
As investors in the space, as people who work in the Valley and tech and other places, the blockchain, a lot of us work in the enterprise companies. So where is the adoption for enterprise blockchain? Because many companies are doing consultation. Gartner says that it's 5 to 10 years out. So what's the driver that will allow investors and people to get into the space?
Anyone want to take that first?
So just could you clarify?
He's like, where are we really when it comes to adoption? You see a lot of proofs of concept, quite a few pilots.
I mean,
so we can. Sorry,
go ahead. So, I mean, I view the blockchain adoption at enterprise like a freight train. You kind of looks like it's going slow, but it has a ton of momentum in terms of people and investment. And the ecosystem grows. The standards, common denominators like Hyperledger for a lot of enterprise customers to get behind. So these are really important things. And like a year, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, this is a massive change in the landscape. And so, from an investor standpoint, there's a lot of horizontal, vertical, players, picks and shovel players in the space that are attacking from a variety of ways. So I think, just like the traditional software business, there's going to be that piece of investing in platform software businesses, and then obviously you have the public cryptocurrency side as well as this one's. What's interesting, the way I'm looking at it is the hype cycle. People talk about hype and blockchain and crypto. It's like we haven't seen anything yet. By the way,
and despite being named Hyperledger, we're not about hyping distributed ledgers. To be clear.
But I mean, you have two flywheels. You have this speculative cryptocurrency flywheel that's getting hot right now, and then you have all these blockchains that are underlying those cryptocurrencies, almost as a proxy for that. And these are kind of going ho-hum. I mean, there's transaction and volume going through Bitcoin, et cetera, but there's not the bite, and the adoption has not really started to click yet. Once this starts happening, this will kind of continue to go hotter and hotter. And again, because we're talking about different factors, like people got really excited on the internet about putting women's shoes and pet food and office supplies online. That was like a big deal, right? Those are like hard challenges. Here, identity and money and house titles, totally different problems to solve. And again, the trust factors go way higher to get these systems right. And so we're just in the early days of this. And I think there's also two worlds happening, where you have this enterprise world where you have incumbents that have brands and resources and a regulatory edge on one side, and on the other side you have this open, permissionless networks that are developing. You're reading all about the Bitcoin 2.0, Ethereum 2.0, et cetera. And these worlds, people are like, are they going to connect or collide? And again, if history is any guide, they will likely connect and find a way to interoperate. I loved your example about the Bitcoin for a house. I think that's a thing, absolutely.
Have you bought a house with Bitcoin?
No,
okay.
I sold. Well,
you would have been one of the few people who had. It would have been on my mind. So okay.
I had to buy it for fiat, unfortunately. So.
Let me add to that. If you look at it from an enterprise perspective, right? there's the infra layer, infrastructure layer. There's a platform layer. There's the application layer, right? Infra and platform clearly, maybe infra not so much. Definitely the platform layer is definitely a big layer. Within the application, you could segment it as engagement layer, transaction, and record layer, if you will, right? Our belief is that transactions are tough to dislodge. It's forklift. It'll happen, but not so much. Records will come, but that'll only happen if something else happens. So we are focused more on the engagement layer. No incumbency, less friction, less compliance, and all of that in certain industries. So that's how we looked at it, and that's how we are focused on disrupting that space.
Interesting. How about the next question? Oh, over here.
Hi.
Hi.
Glenn Cordian with Loyakk. I have a question. So the use case that I'm thinking of is where you have a network of companies, let's say in supply chain. These companies are all needing to interact with each other in order to make agreements about things. So let's say that they're interacting on orders or supplies or inventory, pricing, whatever it might be. And today, there's all kinds of systems and spreadsheets and all kinds of stuff going back and forth between these companies. There's manual networks today that are out there to do this. So what I'm thinking of is, as you want to add blockchain to increase the level of security to get some of the benefits of blockchain, how do you deal with the identity management? So you talk about identity management, and a lot of the transactions that are going to get submitted to blockchain are going to come from a series of convoluted things that happen in the enterprise. It might even happen between companies, but they generate a transaction that says, this has got to get entered into the blockchain. And it may come from a system, right? It may come from SAP. It's a trigger that says, this order's been completed, it knows to go to blockchain. How does identity management get layered onto that we trust that this transaction in the blockchain is actually a valid, that it's valid that it's coming into blockchain from who says it's coming from?
You want to take this?
Sure. So it's interesting. Kind of piecing together two different questions, right? In terms of the speed at which the tech is advancing, and how fast are we going to get to production implementations? To me, the limiting factor is not the technology, right? The technology is moving incredibly fast, and you kind of blink, and there's a new aspect of something new that's been developed. Somewhat to your point, is in a corporate and enterprise construct, which a supply chain would be, right? It's multiple corporates working together on an end-to-end construct. It's the formation of the network, right? The agreement that we're going to get this combination of manufacturers and shippers and ports and wholesalers and retailers to decide to be part of the same platform. And in part of doing that, then working out all of that governance and rules and standards and the identity layer as to, okay, I'm going to issue you a set of keys that is that they will now identify you in this network, and here's how you're going to behave, and here's how you get kicked out if you misbehave. And the formation of that is much more of a business and strategy and operational question. The technology is there to do that. I think it's a leap to make. It's too far a leap to think of a notion of that being something that doesn't fit in a predefined, structured network. The technology is not ready to support doing it in a free-for-all or transactional basis, but that's coming as well. So, I think in the first phase of transformation, it's going to be what parties can get together and agree that construct, and as part of that, they'd be agreeing the identity framework within that construct.
If I could just add to that, the question is a very important one, because we are assuming a blockchain is linear in most cases, right? It need not be. It could be nested. It could be zonal, like the example you gave. SAP may be a part of this network and Cisco part of that, but there may be VMware is part of both. In that notion of zonal nomadic networks, permissions are based on your role in that network. So we file a couple of patents there to address that, because in a corporate enterprise world, flat and public are not probably the best way to go. There'll be nodes and flexible nodes where you come in and out, and you only see what you're supposed to see. But you engage with the partners you care about in your value web. That's how we're looking at it.
Yeah, not to make things more complex, by the way, but I just thought about the concept of participants in a chain, in your network. You have the concept of transactions, but you're also going to have, in many cases, things delivering data to your, and when I mean things, like sensors and those types of things, right? There are going to be participants there. Then you have to deal with the fact that somebody's going to decide how you're going to digitize a process and turn it into a smart contract. So, and I'm not trying to say it is complex. I mean, it is complex. And we have some parallels in the industry where we've been able to achieve standards in a number of different areas. But it's almost like early on today, every network, every ecosystem is going to have its own set of rules and technologies, right? Until we can get to something that's of broader scope, that's cross-industry.
Yeah, so I mean, like turning that into like a colloquial example, right? So the technology exists to have a temperature gauge on the shipping container containing the heads of lettuce, right? You can, if that technology container and there's a sufficient connectivity to be able to have that emanate that data that says this container just exceeded this temperature threshold, and send that data to the ultimate retailer who put in the order to begin with at the end of the supply chain, the rules then around, okay, they're allowed to issue the reorder now, even though today they'd have to wait for it to show up, right? Open it up, have that experience of nasty, spoiled lettuce. But tomorrow they can, it's mid-ship, it's a week out from arriving. I know to reorder. And then the interesting conversations as to, well, how does that work in terms of, now who takes custody of the container when it gets to the port, because now it's going to get decayed by the retailer eventually. Custody has to change, an insurance policy might get triggered. It's working out those business processes of now that the tech has enabled a new set of information in a different time frame. How do what are the rules, right? How are we going to behave?
Yeah. Yep, back here.
This is maybe an adjacency and not quite consistent with what you're doing, but the other night I went to a big stop trafficking, human trafficking thing with Edelman and IBM, and it's an international thing, and they're building an entire blockchain thing for all the places that the trafficked people work, and that's how they trace back to find the people. I don't quite get the technology, but I would love you to, and I know it's a little bit, again, an adjacency, but I'd love to understand a bit more about that.
Right. Well, in the diamond supply chain example, which you didn't touch much on here, but there's a company called Everledger that's working with IBM and SAP on reinventing how the diamond supply chain works to keep out conflict diamonds. There's an existing documentation process called the Kimberley process that everybody in that supply chain uses when they hand diamonds off from one hop to the next to basically document, here's the diamonds, here's what they look like, so that at each hop you have this integrity, right? And when you're getting it from a mine that's been certified as not employing slave labor, well, we can challenge the certification, but at least that's better than diamonds that fell off the back of a truck and are entering the supply chain that way, right? And so this still depends on having inspectors. Still, it depends upon having auditors. But once in the system, anybody buying a diamond should be able to look up in this ledger and see, does this person selling me this diamond have the right to sell it, and does it have clean title, essentially going back to where it came from? Right. So there are similar efforts now in other commodities, from fish to textiles to others. And that's what's giving some people some hope, especially as the application of this to achieving some of the sustainable development goals kind of calls for bringing this extra data into the commerce chains, right, and instrumenting it, whether it's labor conditions or carbon emissions, right, or where the fish was caught. It was caught inside a quota or outside of quota. There's some hope here. It's idealism to no small degree. It's not the entire basis for the value, the reason to move to blockchain, but it's warming enough, encouraging enough that it's getting a lot of people in the social impact sector really excited about using this technology to bring that level of transparency and auditability to these processes. Something that the brands want too. Yeah, I mean, just on the human example. So what ID 2020, like that is one of the use cases that they're very focused on. I'd be happy to spend time with you on it, but if I do it in quick summary, if you're able to take a population
that is typically at high risk of having, being susceptible to human trafficking, do a biometric enrollment into a digital identity construct, and have that in a place that then, what we want to work to is to be able to have that linked. The first time you enroll someone, wherever it is, you're then linking them to an identifier that as they then interact through the rest of society and reach another point where there's another biometric enrollment, and if it's integrated together, then you suddenly have the basis to be able to catch it. But you need those points. You need the first biometric enrollment. You then need a second identity proofing moment to happen to then link them together. It's not easy and it's complicated, but it's in focus. So,
other comments or thoughts? What about, in general, the application of this to social impact applications? Are you seeing that? Is there something interesting out there that's grabbed your attention?
One thing that, so I'm on the board of BitGive, and we just launched yesterday at Money 2020 GiveTrack. And so one of the things in charitable giving, you put money at the funnel, goes down, and you have these statistics on how much gets applied to that particular need. And it's kind of like I don't know if it's a made-up number or you trust it. It's a number. But if, again, same thing on tracking and tracing, if you'd have a funnel that kind of shows what those elements are, what those milestones are, the payments, who gets paid, how that gets paid, and kind of put sunlight on that whole workflow, and you have more confidence in that number, then I think giving gets enhanced. You get more confidence. You want to give more because you know that that's an accountable number. And so those are one of the form factors that I think is a good start. And you use this technology for those types of things where you could add extra sunlight and transparency to a workflow that's kind of murky. So
another example is if you take the notion of ICOs or crowdfunding broadly, right? Why shouldn't a tailor in San Jose, Costa Rica, be able to raise funds? A hardworking guy needs funds to start a business. There's enough population out there who could say, I'm going to give you 0.00001 Bitcoin. So really taking that crowdfunding model to the next layer to impact really the pyramid at the bottom, right? And that is not done today for a variety of reasons, right? But those are real opportunities where we can truly be, quote unquote, socialistic from that perspective and be able to contribute back at a very micro level, but still make a difference in that person's lives.
Yeah,
I like to want. So Brian and I co-judged Blockchain for Good hackathon a couple weekends ago, and one of the runner-up I loved. It was a use case. Can you remember the name?
No.
Okay, damn it. Think of the name. But the use case was basically in recognition of in the academic community. And I'm going to get you. Have me help me with the stats too. There's something like after 4 years of a PhD student or professor doing research, something like 60% of the links to the data are gone, and you go out another few years, and the data's gone. Right. So basically, our world's knowledge that our students are, PhD students, professors are pouring their hearts into developing is getting lost. And so this guy and his team had a great idea of, let's use a distributed ledger construct and, a data storage mechanism like IPFS, and be able to create an auditable, trackable, traceable of here. I'm going to take this, take this data, take this research, take this output, index it, store it in a secure, location, and then be able to have that track and trace and auditability when the student moves on to another university or a job, and the professor, it just now suddenly creates the ability or the hope of retaining our knowledge that is apparently leaking much worse than I thought.
Then the underlying data behind the papers and behind the conclusions and such, so that important research can be reproduced. Why don't we take 2 more questions? Let's see, over here. Yes.
Hi, Nasreen Nasser from Silicon Valley Leadership Group Foundation. If you were speaking to a bunch of lawmakers tonight, what advice, if any, would you give them to focus on near-term and long-term?
That's a good question.
So I've been speaking a lot.
You said for lawyers?
No, lawmakers.
Lawmakers.
Same policy.
Close enough.
Yeah. Well, I was there was a picture of me on CoinDesk where I was in front of a member of Congress from Illinois, and I'm in the picture, like kind of flailing my hands, talking to them, and the conversation really started like this. It was like, I really don't want to be here. I met with 40 members of Congress, 3 letter agencies. It's this way I started a conversation. I don't want to be here. I want to be building, I want to be investing, but I care very deeply about this space, and I want you to know what's happening, what's not happening, and how this technology is moving, because it's really important to me and a lot of people. And it's one of those technologies that will change the world in terms of human trafficking, ID, and all these microfunding pieces. It's like, finally, for the first time in my career, I'm part of something that can change the world. It's like a really cool thing. But for lawmakers, what's interesting is that this technology, especially when you get into money factors, will light up every light. It's just one of those things. And so in any, like when you talk about railroads or telephony or an internet, there's always going to be exuberance and effervescence in every space. And lawmakers will, that the pendulum may swing a little too much. And if they have a better handle on what this technology is, I think 3 or 4% of the members of Congress have any technical background. And so this is really hard for them to get their arms around. And so education is super important. That's the baseline. What's happening now? You're reading the headlines of where is this innovation kind of moving? What's the heat map of the space? And the cryptocurrency, digital asset, token economy, if you will, is going all over the world. It's really kind of a global thing. And from a jurisdictional standpoint, there are hotspots in the world where companies are forming in Singapore, in Switzerland, and the Caymans, outside the U.S., taking innovation and money and ideas and jobs potentially outside the borders here. So I think lawmakers are starting to see that. I mean, the ICO market's about a $3 billion. $3 billion has been raised in about 100 or so projects. This cryptocurrency token market went from about 13, 14 billion from where we're sitting today last year to about 170 billion today, and growing. And so lawmakers need to pay attention to some of these things in terms of jobs. And it's always that proverbial, is this going to create the new Silicon Valley somewhere or the next Wall Street somewhere? And given what the gravity or the potential is of this technology, that's actually a potential.
So Matt's also being quiet here, where he's the co-chairperson of the, or actual chairperson of the Chamber of Digital Commerce. Which is a group that has been active in DC, helping educate organizations there and lawmakers and others about how these technologies work and how they might want to think about them. I, for one, believe that a lot of the functions of government can be provided in a way that, using blockchain technology, that increases the auditability and transparency of those functions. Anything that involves a registry, anything that involves tracking of title, anything that involves a permit, right? Things like your driver's licenses and birth and death certificates could all be issued as certificates on a blockchain. Mm-hmm. But even things like car ownership, house ownership, all sorts of different touch points that people have. I think government could be substantially reinvented with this, and I think the federal government has recognized that pretty clearly. The GSA is now doing a portion of its procurement processes are looking at using blockchain technology to reform that. Lots of other activity. And at the state level, the state of Illinois is incredibly active with a whole bunch of pilots going around birth and death certificates, land title, and I think commodities trading a little bit too. I forget. But the Illinois blockchain initiative is really impressive.
The government of Dubai, too, is also very aggressive, right? They've made some pretty big commitments. So I would say watch what Dubai is doing, because they're really going after it in a very holistic way across all transactions in government. And then I would also ask them to focus on outcomes. I think you hit it, Brian. Look at what we can do in supply chain with food safety. How can we apply that to government services?
That's one of the surprises for me. So I was in Dubai 2 weeks ago meeting with the Global Dubai Blockchain Initiative. And to Brian's point, HHS had its first hackathon, the first government-sponsored hackathon earlier this year. David's a part of the Chamber as well. Chamber of Digital Commerce is a partner with Hyperledger, and so we're a 130-member nonprofit advocacy platform for the blockchain industry. And again, to my surprise, typically governments are kind of lag innovation. Here, the Department of HHS is innovating The State Department sponsored this first trade mission to the UAE with the chambers. That was like new. And every day it's like the post office, it's every function of the government. And the smartest people there are in the room. They're just like, we love this technology, we want to innovate, we want to like create transparency and an open government. And it's really cool to see. And that's a pleasant surprise for me.
Yeah. And then on the reg side specifically, they're behaving like they've never have before, right? So I mean, Commissioner Giancarlo of the CFTC just has announced the sandbox capability. They want to build an innovation backdoor to the CFTC, the Bank of England. There's a really interesting dynamic of the regulators wanting to engage with these startup and innovative communities to understand how to modernize regulations, which is kind of never certainly sitting in capital markets for the past 20 years.
Just to add to that, right? There's government as a consumer of the tech. That's one aspect. On the regulatory side, they are still trying to figure out what the heck is going on. SEC announced a policy statement about 2 months back, and they said we have a policy, but there's no actionable guidelines right now. The challenge is it's a denationalized approach. If we take an action that stops innovation is going to move somewhere else. I could start a company with Isle of Man as headquarters and do an ICO if I wanted to. So it's not as simple as saying we're going to put a moat around our 4 walls and that's it. It doesn't matter. So it's very interesting a question, and I don't think we have an answer yet. There are a lot of good efforts going on. We want to quote unquote govern, not regulate, necessarily govern. So the best practices are there. At the same time, we don't want to choke the golden goose. So that's the balance we've got to strike.
I think we have just barely enough time for one more question. Yes.
Okay, I'll keep it short. I've heard some talk about how distributed ledger technology can really protect data much better than state of the art today, let's say. So I'm kind of taking the view is the larger the attack surface, the more vulnerable a network. Here's distributed ledger nodes everywhere. Is it better because if you hit and break a lock in one place, it's anonymous data, you can't connect it with someone? I mean, why is it, I guess maybe in 2 sentences, 3 sentences, why is it better than existing security measures on networks?
So in a tweet, why is it better? One each of us. That'll be a perfect way to answer.
So in the corporate enterprise construct, most implementations are focusing on off-chain data structures. So the ability to index and link the data, that's going to be too long. It's not a tweet.
I'll give you 280 characters. Just finish the thought.
So yes, fundamentally, just the underlying cryptography that is used to introduce a data element into a blockchain structure provides a data element level of encryption that traditionally, and there's database, there's people. Someone will throw a rock at me for this one, but traditional database structures are protected by a layer of security that wraps around a database, and when you penetrate it, you have access to everything therein. By and large, multiple exceptions. But this, just fundamentally, the fundamental cryptography of blockchain-based solutions is each data element is protected, with the data encryption and hashing construct, et cetera. So it's much harder to get as an equivalent amount of data if you're using an on-chain data structure. Would be I failed.
It's about 560 characters.
Take that and add a hardware layer that really protects that.
Powered by Intel.
I didn't say that.
Just leave it that
one. Anything else?
No, I'm good.
Distributed, decentralized networks matter. I think when you take data and you chunk it to different nodes, different areas, I think that could create a different data set that's more powerful than we have today, which is in one single repository.
Okay, I'd add 2 things. One, at very much a protocol layer, immutability is still there, whether we're talking about the public ledgers or even the permission ledgers. If we record something to a ledger everybody here has a copy of, right, you'd have to break into everybody's systems to go back and modify or delete that thing that had been written, right? So there's a lot of security that comes with that, along with a whole lot of new attack surface. So we'll figure all that out over time. The second thing is, a lot of what the applications are for this is about eliminating counterparty risk, about being able to define things like business arrangements, insurance agreements, all sorts of contracts where those contracts will be executed will be followed through without waiting for the other side, hoping they don't go out of business, or waiting for a bureaucrat to like open their email and finally get through their work log, right? Instead, you can automate this stuff, make it auditable and transparent, and I think that'll end up with a more fair and just society at the other end of that chute. Anyways, thank you to my panelists for a lovely, engaging conversation. Thank you to the folks who asked questions, and thank you to the Churchill Club. And I think Karen will be up to take us away.
Brian, thank you for leading this conversation so well, and all the speakers for sharing your points of view so candidly. We do have a small gift for you. It is the Churchill Club speaker T-shirt. Please wear that in very good health.
Thank you.
A recording of this program will be available on our YouTube channel very shortly. I want to say tomorrow, but maybe give us 48 hours. So I hope that you will find that to be a useful resource for this program and other programs that are posted there as well. You have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. See you next time. Good night.
Thank you. Good job.